Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
the Electoral College will determine the winner.
Illinois congressman on why Republicans refuse to concede to Joe Biden's win over President Trump, plus details on the next stimulus bill.
Let's give each other a chance.
America divided. After the election, the U.S. remains deeply polarized. What the path forward may be.
Help is on the way with a vaccine. We need to hang on. We know there's light at the end of the tunnel.
The new Pfizer vaccine that could change the fight against COVID-19.
Parsing the legal arguments on the Affordable Care Act case being heard by the U.S. Supreme Court today.
So I guess we should have seen this coming.
For the first time, a state Supreme Court justice is booted from the bench. What does it mean for Illinois' High Court?
I'm Angel Ito, and tonight I'll have more on the oldest Black-owned shoe store in the country. They're based right here in Hyde Park.
And after a week-long heat wave, a cold front and tornado are expected to hit Chicago. Is that much fluctuation in weather normal? But first, some of today's top stories. Almost the entire country falls under the city's emergency travel order, requiring travelers from other states to quarantine upon arrival in Chicago. Chicago Public Health Commissioner Dr. Allison Arwady unveiled a revamped order today, color-coding states in red, orange, and yellow based on their levels of coronavirus. Those states in red are faring worse than Chicago and require a 14-day quarantine. Those in orange are still concerning, with 15 to 60 cases per 1,000 people per day. They require either a 14-day quarantine or a negative test taken before arriving in Chicago. And states in yellow are seeing less than 15 people per day per 100,000, and no quarantine is required, though Arwady's office still recommends avoiding non-essential travel. She also says compared to 1 month ago, the city of Chicago's new case count, positivity rate, and death numbers are growing at exponential rates.
We're seeing a continued rise, significantly higher than we were seeing at our first peak. There are no signs of slowing, and our doubling time is at 12 days.
Meanwhile, the state of Illinois has passed more than 500,000 cases of the coronavirus for a total of more than 511,000. The state today reported more than 12,000 new cases and 79 deaths. The state's total number of deaths is nearing 10,300, and the test positivity average is 13.1%. Phil Ponce will have more on a potential vaccine for the coronavirus in just a few minutes. House and Senate leadership in Springfield say they plan to cancel the upcoming veto session. Members were slated to meet mid-next week and again in early December, but House Speaker Michael Madigan's office says a strong majority of members prefer a delay due to these rising COVID-19 numbers. When asked about it this afternoon before it was confirmed, Governor J.B. Pritzker expressed disappointment at the possibility.
We have so much work to do in Springfield, there's no doubt. And I guess I know why people are concerned about gathering. I am discouraging gathering across the state, but I must say it would be disappointing. We just have so many things we need to accomplish.
The current 101st General Assembly is scheduled to conclude on January 13th, when the 102nd is inaugurated. And now to Paris Schutz and members of Illinois' congressional delegation. Paris.
Brandis, there are 71 days left in the Trump administration, and there's also a lame duck session in Congress before the new Congress is sworn in January 3rd. But most Republicans are not congratulating President-elect Joe Biden. In fact, here's what Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said today, and then Biden's reaction.
Is the State Department currently preparing to engage with the Biden transition team? And if not, at what point does a delay hamper a smooth transition or pose a risk to national security?
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration.
So far, there is no evidence of any of the assertions made by the President or Secretary of State Pompeo.
And joining us tonight to talk about the election, the future of Obamacare, and the possibility of a new stimulus package are Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, a Democrat representing Illinois' 9th District, which includes parts of Chicago's north side and northern suburbs, Congressman Mike Quigley, a Democrat who represents Illinois' 5th District, which includes some of the north side of Chicago, as well as other parts of Cook and DuPage counties, and Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, a Democrat representing Illinois' 8th District, which includes Elgin, Schaumburg, and Addison. We invited every Republican member of the Illinois congressional delegation to participate in tonight's discussion. They all declined our invitation. We are glad to have you three back on Chicago Tonight. First, Congressman Quigley, you heard the statement from Secretary Pompeo. You've seen only a smattering of Republicans acknowledge the Biden victory. Are you concerned that the Trump administration, through whatever maneuver, is not going to give up power come January 20th?
Well, eventually they're going to give up power. The Secret Service will escort them out, and the Department of Defense has already said they wouldn't interfere because President Trump is no longer the commander-in-chief. But I'm very concerned that in the meantime, we don't have a peaceful transfer of power. And that creates a great deal of trouble for issues like the intelligence community, the Department of Defense, the State Department, our government finances. How this process transitions is absolutely critical. And it's worked for the 43 presidents prior to this president, and the Republicans have to step up, do the right thing, and tell the president it's time to go.
Certainly an unprecedented situation right now. Congresswoman Schakowsky, also today, you have the president, well, late yesterday, firing his defense secretary and getting rid of many of the top level aides at the Pentagon and replacing them with loyalists. What does that tell you?
Well, I think that does potentially create a national security problem for us. Why would he fire somebody with just a few days until his term is over? I hope it doesn't bode that he has some other plans that the secretary would not go along with. So I think that is a very worrisome sign. And the president is clearly living in this fantasy world right now, exchanging chief members of his cabinet and denying 100% that this race is over. And now we have to get to the business of a real transition. And I am just afraid that we're going to be more divided than ever. But I do have faith that Joe Biden is going to be able finally to pull us together.
Congressman Krishnamurthy, what about the national security threat to all those changes at the top of the Pentagon and other sort of maneuverings at top-level cabinet positions right now?
I'm very concerned. One of the weaknesses that the 9/11 Commission found with regard to our national security apparatus was there was a poor transition between the Bill Clinton and the George W. Bush presidencies with regard to a lot of intelligence gathering and collection and analysis. We don't want anything close to that happening now, and that's why it's so important that, for instance, Joe Biden be given the presidential daily brief, which every other president, including Donald Trump, was given during his transition to power. The message that the American people sent loud and clear on November 3rd is unify, come together under Joe Biden, and tackle the problems that confront all of us together right now.
And Biden today expressing confidence that it's okay. He's not reading the presidential daily briefing yet because there's one president at a time. Congressman Quigley, what about the Republicans' argument that, well, media organizations projected a winner, but the results have not been certified, and the president does reserve the right to put forth any challenges that they see fit?
Sure. 4 years ago, quite the opposite took place. I mean, the president won 4 years ago because of the electoral college differences in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, a difference of about 78,000 votes. I suspect Mrs. Clinton could have, Secretary Clinton could have challenged that, but she elected not to because it was still clear that the voters had decided. There is absolutely no one of reason who doesn't believe that that's going to change. The irony is that President Biden is going to win with about the exact same number of electoral votes, about 306. The way votes are counted now, a recount's not going to change anything. The former governor of Wisconsin acknowledged the same. So this isn't just poor sportsmanship. This is horrible government. It sends a terrible message to the public. It sends a terrible message to the rest of the world that we can't function properly as a democracy.
And you know, there, in Washington, chattering in newspapers, there's a lot of speculation as to why Congress people are reacting this way, failing to recognize the results of the election. Congresswoman Schakowsky, do you believe it's because there are Republicans that know how much power that President Trump has in the Republican Party and they can't risk offending that base, or do they really believe that results could be overturned?
I can't believe that my colleagues think that this is going to be overturned. No, I think that they are afraid of their own constituents, and that the president continues with this misinformation, and they are just worried that they will be vulnerable the next time. I think it's shameful. They too will go down in history along with Donald Trump as heading up the most shameful, lying. I'm not going to do all the adjectives. You can add your own administration, but it's really dangerous. It is not good for our democracy to continue to do that. And shame on them for siding with him.
Certainly putting a lot of things in limbo for the American public. Congressman Krishnamurthy, Biden did win the presidential race, but the Senate Democrats didn't do as well as they expected. House Democrats are poised to lose a few seats but keep their majority. Is there any sort of post-mortem as to why the night didn't go better for Democrats in the House and Senate?
I'm going to let others do the post-mortem. The message that I got, I represent a suburban district, almost all suburban, except for the runways of O'Hare. Mike has the terminals. But we'll talk about gerrymandering another time. But the message I got from my voters, the 72% who voted for me, was you got to unify, come together, get something done, make sure that we tackle the health crisis, which has cost 220,000 Americans their lives, tackle the economic crisis, where 12 million Americans remain unemployed, including a lot in my district, which is a hub for retail, hospitality, the airline industry, and so forth. And then let's try to unify on issues of racial equity and equality. These are pressing matters, and we need to come together and get behind Joe Biden and the healing process that he has begun.
And one of the things that folks would like to see progress on is any more stimulus relief for COVID. We're going to talk about that in a sec when we come back. But for now, our thanks to Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, Congressman Mike Quigley, and Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy. Again, we invited Republican members of the Illinois delegation, but none were able to join us this evening. But again, we thank you for being here.
Georgia on our mind.
And we will hear more from these members of Congress later in the program to discuss the status of the next stimulus package. But for now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. The makeup of the Illinois Supreme Court is changing, and it comes at a pivotal time. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more on the evolving bench and what it means for residents. Amanda, what's the latest?
Brandis, Illinois' 7 Supreme Court justices met in Springfield today, as they regularly do, to hear oral arguments. Although this time, of course, it was with social distancing and masks. It was the last time, however, that this particular tight-knit group will be meeting in this capacity. At the end of arguments, Chief Justice Ann Burke led the way in saying goodbye to 2 of the justices.
Also, on behalf of the court, I'd like to, for the record, thank both Justice Carmeier and Justice Kilbride for their many years of service to the state of Illinois and to the legal profession.
Justice Lloyd Carmeier, who represents the southernmost of Illinois' 5 Supreme Court districts, is retiring. But Justice Thomas Kilbride, well, he made history, the first Illinois Supreme Court justice to have lost a battle for retention. In last Tuesday's election, he came up short, getting support from 60% of voters in a large district that stretches across north central Illinois. It came after a contentious and expensive $11 million plus campaign, with Democrats and unions seeking to keep Kilbride on the bench and Republicans, business interests, and hedge fund operator Ken Griffin seeking to unseat him. Law professor Ann Lucene helped to craft Illinois' Constitution back in 1970, and she says the writers of the Constitution had good reason for putting in a retention mechanism for Illinois' elected judges.
It's always been felt since 1964 there should be a way for the voters to get rid of somebody. And retention means they run against their record. They don't run against a candidate against them. They run on their record. And it's generally worked very well.
With Kilbride leaving the bench, it was up to Illinois Supreme Court justices remaining there to choose a temporary, albeit years-long replacement. And today they did just that, choosing Judge Robert Carter of Ottawa to the seat. Now, Carter will hold on to it until 2022, but he's a placeholder. He said that he will not try to hold that place on the bench, which means, you guessed it, another election 2 years from now.
So we'll have Republicans running in the Republican primary, Democrats running in the Democratic primary, and that would be, it may be a completely open seat. And with it may very well come, if you want to call it partisan control of the Illinois Supreme Court.
Kilbride originally ran as a Democrat and gave Democrats a 4-3 majority on the Illinois Supreme Court. Reason why Republicans tried so hard to get him out of there? Well, they see winning his seat as a chance to flip that status. And why does that matter? Well, for one, redistricting. Legislators are going to soon begin redrawing boundaries for their districts, and the Supreme Court gets to make the final call approving those maps. But Dan Bach, who writes the newsletter called States of Crisis, and he's followed the Illinois courts for decades, says that even if the GOP does gain control of the courts come 22, well, it'll be too late for redistricting.
If you just looked at the process by which all this happens, the redistricting case will come up before a new judge is elected to the Supreme Court. And we just saw that a Democrat was named to the Supreme Court. Now, by all, I'm not, supposing to know how he's going to vote. He has a long, pretty distinguished resume. But, they didn't get the partisan advantage if they were looking for that by unseating Kilbride.
Puck also says that some of those who'd worked so hard to unseat Kilbride may hope that tilting the judicial scales will help their chances should the Illinois Supreme Court again be asked to rule on whether Illinois can legally reduce pension benefits.
There is a push to somehow allow the state to just say, we don't owe that money anymore. With $130 billion of pension debt, that's very tempting. But the Supreme Court has repeatedly said, no, you can't do that.
Bach also points out that previously, when asked to weigh in on pensions, the court unanimously ruled that Illinois does have a constitutional clause that protects those benefits. There are, of course, plenty of other cases that go before the Illinois Supreme Court that have consequences, major consequences, of course, for businesses, for unions, trial attorneys, and so on. The judiciary, with all of this partisan discussion, is supposed to be above partisanship, but these big money campaigns brought about in light of Citizens United, well, they're muddling it. And that's something that I asked Justice Kilbride about a couple of weeks ago before the election.
I, for one, especially right now, would prefer it to be an appointment process, but we are where we are. And absent some amendment to the Illinois Constitution or a change by the United States Supreme Court on Citizens United that opened the floodgates to money that's coming into court battles across the state, not just in Illinois, absent a change in that category, we're not going to see any less contentious battles.
The seat that Kilbride is leaving open is not, by the way, the only Illinois Supreme Court contest that we'll be seeing in 2022. It's getting a lot of attention because that district is a competitive and a purple one, but there are also two other contests, one in central Illinois and one in the suburbs that may well also be in partisan play. Brandis, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. And coming up later, the United States Supreme Court hears arguments on the Affordable Care Act. But first, to Phil Ponce and hopeful news in the fight against COVID-19. Phil.
Brandis, it was news that had been hoped for since the gravity of the COVID pandemic became known. Yesterday, Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla announced that interim results show its vaccine to be more than 90% effective against the coronavirus. Here's a little of what Bourla had to say.
90% is a game changer. 90%, now you are hoping to have a tool in your war against this pandemic that could be significantly effective. I think that likely, based on impact, that will be the greatest medical advance in the last 100 years, if you think about it, right? And it is extraordinary that it's coming at a time that the world needs it the most.
Joining us now to give their assessment of the new Pfizer vaccine are Dr. Kathleen Mullane, Chief of Clinical Trials for Infectious Diseases at UChicago Medicine, which is currently recruiting volunteers to evaluate the safety and effectiveness of a COVID-19 vaccine. And Thomas Hope, professor in the Department of Cell and Developmental Biology, Obstetrics, and Gynecology at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine. His lab has been involved in the Trump administration's Operation Warp Speed to try and speed development of a coronavirus vaccine, that is. And first of all, Dr. Mullane, your reaction to Pfizer's announcement yesterday?
I think all of us were exceedingly happy to see the results. They are interim results. We need to see the results after they acquire about 160 some odd patients to be sure that we know that those results will hold out. But it's certainly very encouraging, and I think all of us are really happy.
We apparently have lost Professor Hope, some technical problems. We hope to get him back. But Dr. Mullane, when Pfizer says that it's 90% effective, what does that mean? 90% effective in keeping people from getting the disease? Might it also be helpful to people who already have it? Explain that for us.
Sure. So all of the studies are being run fairly similarly. The patients are to enter without having a known history of COVID. However, we do antibody titers on those patients, and so we know that some of those people will present and have had a silent infection. And so we want to see both the effect of the vaccine in those people who didn't have a history of COVID, and to see if there's a response in those people who did have a history of COVID, still blinded to all of us. So when we look at the 90% efficacy, they looked at 91 patients, and they made sure that the patients had received 2 doses of vaccine and were at least 7 days out of their last dose of vaccine to say that they had good titers of antibodies present. They found 91 patients, the first 91, who developed COVID. And of those patients who developed COVID, 90% were in the placebo arm, and 10% or less than 10% were in the vaccine arm, which showed that the vaccine was very efficacious. When we look at influenza season, we're happy if it's 50% effective. And we know that our best vaccine is probably the measles vaccine, which has a vaccine efficacy of about 97%. So having one out of the ballpark at 90% with the first evaluation from a blinded or an unblinded, unaffiliated safety monitoring board is just really exciting.
And we do have Professor Thomas Hope back with us. Professor Hope, given how fast the vaccine was developed, relatively speaking, are there any concerns that you might have about its safety?
I think that's a really important question, and the answer is I have no reservations about the safety. These methods that are made to deliver the vaccine have been in development for a long time. They've been evaluated, and essentially what's going on is a piece of the COVID is put in to replace whatever vaccine it was to before. And I'm also really encouraged by the transparency. We've been hearing how there's been temporary stoppages in some studies. They are doing a proper large-scale study. And so I think that we will know if this vaccine is safe. This is an interim report, but I will gladly take the vaccine when it becomes available.
And Professor Hope, let me stick with you for a second since we lost you for a bit. Does this Are there other unknowns about this vaccine, questions that still need to be answered?
Well, I think it just takes some time to see how well the vaccine works and if there are any unfortunate side effects or any other issues that might come up. It seems like there really haven't been any issues along those lines. And so, but it's very important to complete the trial, to let the study go to completion and then make decisions on how to move forward. History is full of examples of quick decisions and problems down the line.
Dr. Mullane, in terms of getting production up and running, in terms of distributing this vaccine, I understand that it has to be maintained at a very low temperature. What are some of the challenges in regarding those areas?
So the type of vaccine that this one is and the Moderna vaccine, both Pfizer and Moderna, are messenger RNA vaccines. And a messenger RNA vaccine is just a small piece of the genetic material that has been transcribed like we would normally to make proteins in our body. That vaccine then is, or that protein or nucleic acid is introduced to our immune cells, which pick it up. Now, the beauty of these vaccines is they are very easy to mechanize and to mass produce. And so it's not where you have to grow up viral vectors. These are very safe and very easy to rev up production. And in fact, Pfizer estimates that they'll have almost 50 million doses by the end of the year, which means that 25 million people by the end of the year will be able to be fully vaccinated. The issue with the -70 is a problem with Pfizer compared to Moderna. However, Pfizer has, pulled out the stops to make sure that they have the ability to be able to deliver the vaccine to the sites that it's needed. And certainly we will need multiple vaccines because 25 million doses is not enough.
Professor Hope, last question for you. Will this negate the need for masks altogether?
No. Absolutely not. We are in the middle of our highest levels of virus spread right now. The vaccine is not ready for prime time. It's not out there for everybody to have doses. And we have, as Dr. Fauci has told us, we have a hard winter ahead of us. And so masks, social distancing, hand washing, being appropriate in crowds, not having huge parties with people who are not behaving by wearing masks and washing their hands is absolutely necessary to reduce the spread of this infection.
And that's where I'll have to leave it. Dr. Mullane, Professor Hope, thank you both for joining us. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And up next, we learn more about the unusually warm weather this past week, so stay with us.
Coverage of science and technology on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Joel M. Friedman, president of the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund.
If it weren't for the bare trees and holiday decorations, you might have thought it was springtime in Chicago. This past week has treated us to some unseasonably warm days with temps reaching into the mid-70s at times. But what goes up must come down. WTTW News reporter Patty Wetley joins us now with more on what kind of weather to expect this week. So Patty, we've had, a week-long escape from, seasonal reality. What kind of weather should we expect tonight and in the days ahead?
Well, things are going to come to a crashing halt this evening. We're going to lose about 20-30 degrees in temperature within the next few hours. So long spring, hello fall, moving into winter with, some severe weather coming with it. I saw a report from the National Weather Service that the Aurora Airport notched a 79-mile-an-hour wind gust. So there's a lot of heavy wind, strong wind coming with this cold front.
Winds of change. So after all of these record high temps this week, is this kind of, weather fluctuation normal?
Well, what we've seen in the last week is an all-time record. It is the longest string of 70-degree temperatures this late in the year since 1871, since they started recording. So It's not normal, but it's not like it's never expected to get warm temperatures in November. We do get these warm temperatures, like 170-degree day every November. Every 35 years or so, we get a handful of them, but this is pretty unusual, to say the least, to get this many nice days in a row.
And you know what they say about the weather in Chicago. If you don't like it, just wait 5 minutes or
It's
30,
2020.
or 35
Everything's
years.
been off the charts, so why not this?
Patty Wetley, thanks so much as always.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Patty's full story on our website. That's at WTTW.com/news. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, a look at the legal arguments for and against the Affordable Care Act in a case playing out before the Supreme Court. We check back in with a few Illinois Congress members about what's next for a possible COVID vaccine and a potential stimulus agreement. And arts correspondent Angel Ito shares how the oldest Black-owned shoe store in the country is serving the community during a pandemic. But first, some more of today's top stories. Governor J.B. Pritzker focused on the state's rising coronavirus hospitalizations today in his daily briefing. He says 5 of the state's regions have passed their peak hospitalization rates in the spring. 4 others are close behind. And he says regions 10 and 11, that's suburban Cook County and Chicago, remain far behind their spring peaks by half, but he's concerned about the trends that he's seeing in the Cook County suburbs.
4,200 now, 4,800 back then. In short, we're now just hundreds short of our worst COVID hospitalization numbers last spring.
And those are statewide numbers the governor is referring to. The state of Illinois has passed more than 500,000 cases of the coronavirus for a total of more than 511,000. Public health officials confirmed more than 12,000 new cases, making it more than any other day during this pandemic, and 79 deaths. The state's total number of deaths is nearing 10,300, and the 7-day positivity rate for tests is 13.1%. The state also passed a testing milestone today, reporting more than 100,000 tests completed in a day. Chicago bars and restaurants facing lost revenue because of the pandemic can apply for the city's hospitality grant program starting today. The mayor announced the program last week, providing $10,000 grants to bars and restaurants that have no more than $3 million in annual revenue and have experienced at least a 25% revenue loss due to COVID-19. Recipients will be selected via lottery, with a portion reserved for businesses in low and moderate income community areas. Applications close in 2 weeks on November 23rd. And now to Paris Schutz with the latest on Obamacare. Paris.
That's right, Brandis. There are signs of life for the beleaguered Affordable Care Act today. Some of the more conservative members of the U.S. Supreme Court made statements that appear to be in opposition to the case striking down the law, or seeking to strike down the law. And this comes during oral arguments in a case supported by the Trump administration. Joining us to talk about this case and what it means is Michael Scodro, a partner at Mayor Brown and former Illinois Solicitor General who clerked for Justice Sandra Day O'Connor in the late 1990s. Michael, welcome back to Chicago Tonight.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so remind us very briefly what's at stake with this case.
Sure. Well, many will remember back in 2012 when there was a constitutional challenge to the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare as it's come to be known. And folks may remember that it survived. It was a 5-4 vote, and it survived on the theory that the so-called mandate, otherwise known as the shared responsibility payment, the amount one has to pay if they don't get, if they don't purchase health insurance, that was actually a tax, and that preserved the statute under Congress's taxing power. What's up today is Congress back in 2017, it more recently took effect. They zeroed out the amount of that payment. And so the challenge brought by a number of states and a couple of individuals, they're saying, look, now that you're no longer collecting any revenue on this mandate, on this penalty for not purchasing health insurance, you can no longer call it a tax, and now it's unconstitutional. And so there are a number of legal questions that came up at today's oral argument. But
I want to get to that, Michael. So what is the plaintiff case? And we know what the defense is. The plaintiff. I'm sorry. What's the defense to that? You just said what the plaintiff case was.
Absolutely. So the defense, there are multiple layers to the defense. One is that the states and the individuals who are suing actually don't have what's called standing. That is to say, they don't have authority. They haven't been injured by this provision, and therefore cannot bring this lawsuit. There were a number of questions over nearly 2 hours of argument today, Paris, that really focused on that question. If they get past that, the next question is, well, wait a minute. It does still, there is a requirement. It does say that you shall purchase health insurance, but it's no longer backed by a penalty. The legal theory is that the federal government can't command you to purchase health insurance, but does it still command you? The defendants would say, no, it doesn't, because there's no penalty behind it. And then at the very end of the day, and this has received a lot of press, at the end of the day, the question is, even if that provision, which has been zeroed out and therefore may have no current effect, if that is unconstitutional, does it matter to the rest of the statute? And I think there you saw a number of justices, more than a majority, saying that they were deeply skeptical that the entire act should be struck down, even if they find that one provision.
And I think you're referring to this notion of severability, though. So since the Republican Congress got rid of the tax that went along with the individual mandate, the argument is, well, that's severed now. The individual mandate's still there. Let's hear what Justice Brett Kavanaugh said about this.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Verrilli, but let's assume, just for the sake of argument, assume I don't agree with that, and then we get to severability. I tend to agree with you. This is a very straightforward case for severability under our precedents, meaning that we would excise the mandate and leave the rest of the act in place, reading our severability precedents. One of my questions is, do you think would have been the right result under the 2010 Act, or did that change in 2017?
So do these and other comments lead you to believe that Justice Kavanaugh and others are probably going to uphold the Affordable Care Act?
It's always dangerous to predict based solely on argument, but the short answer is yes. Both the Chief Justice and Justice Kavanaugh, along with more liberal members of the court, seem deeply skeptical with questions just like the one you played, suggesting that they were at least currently thinking that even if they strike down the so-called mandate provision 5000A, the remainder of the act would remain in place.
So is there any blueprint that you see, because obviously President-elect Joe Biden wants to expand upon the Affordable Care Act, any blueprint that a Supreme Court ruling would give to constitutionally doing that?
Well, if the court does go the way, if they do find standing and they do find that this one provision is unconstitutional once it's been zeroed out, and those are big ifs, if they reach both of those conclusions but they say we can sever it, that would certainly leave the door open to reinstituting that provision later with some number above zero, some actual penalty, or tax amount that would then satisfy the rationale of the 2012 decision.
So you're saying that if a Congress and President-elect Joe Biden want to reinstitute an individual mandate or a tax to purchase that was a penalty before they called it a tax, they could do that?
Yes, if that's simply severed out, they could absolutely do that.
Does it give you any broader implication to how they might, a 6-3 court might rule, say that the Biden administration wants to pass, laws in different areas like the environment or other things? Because Roberts is basically saying, our job is not to do what Congress does, pass laws.
Right, and I think that does show a degree of judicial modesty that I think, as a general principle favors the executive, certainly favors Congress in their capacity to pass laws that would survive constitutional challenge. I will say that, depending on whether this is a standing decision, a merits decision, whether, how severability plays out, all of those things certainly can have an impact on how much running room Congress has going forward.
All right, Michael Scott, you got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us, as always.
Thank you, Paris.
And up next, we check back in with members of Illinois' congressional delegation for their thoughts on the next stimulus bill, so please stick around.
Latinos, who make up 1/3 of the population, continue to power the city that works.
These are the people that are working 3 jobs, knowing that COVID is out there. Those are the people that need the help, and we should help them.
And we're back with 3 members of the Illinois congressional delegation to talk about the status of the next stimulus package. Joining us again are Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, a Democrat who serves in congressional leadership as the Senior Chief Deputy Whip, Congressman Mike Quigley, a Democrat who serves on the Appropriations and Intelligence Committees, and Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy, a Democrat who serves as an Assistant Whip and sits on the Oversight and Intelligence Committees. Again, we invited all the Republican members of the Illinois delegation, but they declined our invitation tonight. And again, we're happy that you three Congress folks join us tonight. Let's talk about COVID relief. Congressman Quigley, is there a package that could be negotiated with the Senate that would pass in lame duck?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, Mitch McConnell says that it should be the first thing on the agenda, springing into action about, what, 6 months after the House Democrats passed a pretty comprehensive bill, and then as an attempt to compromise, passed HEROES 2, coming down $1 trillion. So it's about time, if he finally means it. Clearly there's a deal to be done, if only to get us into the next administration.
Congresswoman Schakowsky, would a deal involve money for municipalities like Chicago and Illinois and transit agencies that say they desperately need the money right now?
That's certainly on the agenda of Speaker Pelosi, saying that we need state and local help. But so far, we have not heard that either from the White House or from Mitch McConnell. And I just want to tell you that it is just desperate out there. And I get calls too often from constituents, men and women, who are weeping into the telephone because they can't pay the rent, they can't put food on the table. So there's a desperate need for a recovery bill to actually pass. And so far, we've heard there is interest from the White House and from Mitch McConnell, and I hope we're going to get to be on the same page.
And all this comes as COVID reaches its worst peak yet. In the winter here, cases continuing to spiral out of control. Congressman Krishnamurthy, there is some light at the end of the tunnel with a vaccine trial for Pfizer saying that their trial was 90% effective. How soon do you think a vaccine would be available to the public, and then how would it be distributed out to the public?
What we're hearing is that potentially there might be some fraction of the number that's needed to vaccinate the entire population, possibly ready by the winter time, assuming that these vaccines are proved to be safe and effective. That's extremely important, by the way, that there be a transparent process to verify that. Otherwise, the American people won't take the vaccine. With regard to how it's going to be distributed, I think that's something that's very high on the agenda for Joe Biden. He has to make sure that it's distributed fairly, that we make sure that we distribute it to communities of color and others who are vulnerable populations right now, along with our first responders and health professionals who are going to be dealing with people on the front lines. And then we have to make sure that we encourage in a massive public relations campaign that everybody get vaccinated, because there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy right now. Not only anti-vaxxers who already existed before the pandemic, but quite frankly, people who are just concerned that Donald Trump and others politicize the process and need to be reassured that a new sheriff is in town, there's new management, and we're going to make sure that this is safe and effective when it gets delivered to the American people.
A lot of uncertainty there. Congresswoman Schakowsky, today in the Supreme Court there were oral arguments heard in the case to overthrow the Affordable Care Act. It sounded from the statements made by some conservative justices that they might be receptive to keeping it. Is that the way you're reading it?
Well, first of all, the president, of course, would be absolutely furious because he is determined to undo the Affordable Care Act. But what you said is absolutely true. Even from Kavanaugh and from the Chief Justice, there seemed to be some support for keeping the Affordable Care Act pretty much intact. And so we're going to have to wait and see. But let's hope for the best, because there would be literally millions and millions of Americans that would not have protection for pre-existing condition, actually about 130 million Americans, and millions of others that would be suffering from the loss of the Affordable Care Act. The president just wants to do away with anything that Barack Obama did regardless of its consequence for the American people.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Our thanks to Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, Congressman Mike Quigley, and Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Paris.
Thank you.
And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. Political polarization runs deep in America. Though the election is over, tensions still run high. And while the divide is unmistakable in states with tight races like Pennsylvania, it's also evident here in Illinois, a blue stronghold that sees a stark difference between the vote in Chicago, the suburbs, and the rest of the state. Joining us to discuss the political divide and what the path forward may be are Laurel Harbridge Young, a political science professor at Northwestern University. Her research focuses on partisan conflict and the lack of bipartisan agreement in American politics. And Purvi Patel, Director of Civic and Campus Engagement at the University of Chicago Institute of Politics. She leads its Bridging the Divide program, which brings together urban and rural college students in Illinois to have conversations about their differences. And welcome both of you to Chicago Tonight. Laurel, let's start with you, please. The presidential election, it was far from a landslide victory for President-elect Joe Biden. What do the results tell you about partisanship in America?
So I think it speaks to just how strong partisanship is as a social identity for people. That regardless of Trump's handling of the pandemic, regardless of the consequences for the economy over the last 9 months, really the partisanship in terms of people's vote in the election looked much like we might have thought it would had the election been held before the pandemic began. Early polls and kind of exit polls are suggesting that 94% of Republicans voted for President Trump. And so it was not a case where, people abandoned their party and voted across the aisle. I think Biden did pick up some individuals, both some Republicans, more independents, who voted for him but did not vote for Democrats further down the ballot. But despite these kind of few crossovers, the main message from this election is that partisanship continues to dominate our political landscape.
Are we more divided than we've ever been?
I think in some respects we are. So when we think about the U.S. Congress, we have good metrics going back historically, and we're at similar levels of partisan conflict and polarization there back in the kind of post-Civil War period, and even kind of going up towards World War II. But among the U.S. public, we really only have good metrics going back to the 1950s when polling began more systematically with kind of good methodology. And from that period on, polarization in the public has risen. And so we really don't have a similar period of polarization in the public as today, when we have both some degree of polarization by issue positions, although many people are still moderate. But what we've really seen a growth of is this kind of affective or social polarization, where people really hate the opposing side. So it's about how they feel towards those in the out-group versus their in-group.
Purvi Patel, can you briefly explain for us about the Bridge the Divide program at the University of Chicago Institute of Politics?
Sure. So the Bridging the Divide is a program that started after the 2016 election. Our institute's founder, David Axelrod, was really saddened by the divisions that we were already starting to see between urban and rural areas, and the caricatures and stereotypes that existed within those communities of the other. And so Bridging the Divide is a program that brings together students from University of Chicago, Arrupe College, which is a 2-year school in Chicago, and Eureka College, a college that's located in downstate Illinois. And the purpose of the program is to break down stereotypes and build relationships. We're really focused on helping students build the skills and motivation to find common ground with people who are different from themselves.
So, Laurel, do politicians benefit from this partisanship?
They do. I think that it's certainly not the case that the American public caused polarization among our elected officials, but there is definitely a feedback loop between them, where our elected officials can send signals or cues to the American public about positions to take or kind of how to treat the other side. But also then the American public, the most vocal people who reach out to their members of Congress tend to be the most ardent partisans. So the messages that our elected officials hear are those people who do not want them to compromise, who want them to kind of fight until the end. And it's also the case that kind of the ways in which kind of interest groups and others, they also reward legislators for kind of taking messaging votes where they're not really trying to govern, they're just trying to take a stance and kind of provide signaling to their side or their base. And so there are lots of activists, interest groups, and others that reward legislators for behavior that shows an unwillingness to work across the aisle and to compromise.
Now, while Illinois is a blue state, that is primarily because of Chicago, but the suburbs, those are turning blue as well. We're looking at a map right now showing the results of the 2020 presidential election in Illinois, showing the rest of the state mostly red, some pockets of blue. Porvi, what does this tell you about division in Illinois?
Yeah, I mean, it's a recurring theme. One of the activities that we do is have the students participate and listen to a political focus group in Chicago and in Illinois, in downstate Illinois. And in downstate Illinois, it's a recurring theme that the folks who are downstate don't feel like their interests are aligned with those who live in Chicago. They don't find commonality with the lives and lived experiences of Chicagoans. And often, and this is beyond just the last couple of elections, there's been a trend to say, like, we should divorce ourselves from Chicago. We have nothing in common. Our interests don't work together. And there's also often a lot of misinformation that they're paying for some of the challenges and budget issues and other things that happen in Chicago. So that my money is going up there to a community that I don't identify with, I don't relate to, and that I feel like I have nothing in common with.
And over the summer, of course, we saw a lot of civil unrest over the summer, conversations around the police and the Black Lives Matter movement. Those proved to be extremely divisive. Again, Porvi, how does race factor into polarization?
Yeah, I think race is a huge factor. And one of the questions that I think about a lot outside of political party affiliation is thinking about how polarization is shaped by structural forces, whether that's education, housing, transportation, race, or socioeconomic status. We know that that some of those factors shape what information we get, who we're in relationship with, and what our cultural landscape is, where we can even see humanity in one another. And so when conversations about polarization stop at just party affiliation, I think it feels incomplete because forces like race shape and animate all aspects of our day-to-day life, regardless of what racial identity you are. And so doing some of that work and making those connections is really important.
And Laurel, we've got about 20 seconds left. What are some of the consequences of this kind of polarization?
So I think certainly the most kind of striking one right now that we're facing is the ways in which polarization is contributing to a kind of perception of illegitimacy of the electoral outcome. That as it is, people on the losing side of a close election are going to be more likely to see it as illegitimate. But when things are so polarized and our elected officials are contributing to a narrative of there being voter fraud without any evidence to date, this just contributes to perceptions of illegitimacy, which is really damaging to our electoral institutions, our democratic society, and our ability to kind of understand and relate to the other side.
Okay. My thanks to Laurel Harbridge-Young and Porvi Patel. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, a historic Black-owned business celebrates a major milestone. But first, a look at the weather. A shoe store on the South Side is celebrating 50 years as the only independent Black-owned shoe retailer in the country. Despite the pandemic limiting interactions, customers still refer to Wesley's Shoe Corral as their home away from home. Arts correspondent Angel Ito visited to share how its shoes are a step ahead.
It's the family atmosphere at Wesley's Shoe Corral that customers say has kept it around for the last 50 years.
When you shop with merchants who look like you and understand your background, it's like being with a family.
From dress shoes to running shoes to dance shoes, Wesley's specializes in the art of the shoe.
Everybody likes shoes. Shoes are very cultural for us, I would say. Jordans, Nike, all of that stuff, Adidas. But Bruce brings something else to the table. You can get all those things here if you ask for them, if you want them, but there's so many other options.
Started by Alvin J. Wesley in 1970, the only Black independent shoe retailer in the U.S. is now run by his son, Bruce.
Why do you believe that Wesley stands out in comparison to other shoe stores? What are you going to get here that you won't get anywhere else?
I mean, we want people to always remember, and we want the new generation to experience the sit and fit process. Shoes could still look cute, cool, but be comfortable as well. We really pride ourselves in finding the best for the community,
Their sit and fit process has even waited on the likes of former Senator Carol Moseley Braun and the Obama family. It was recently ranked as the #1 shoe retailer in Illinois and 13th in the country. Customers agree as they share what's kept them coming back for generations.
And I've started buying shoes for my daughter. I have 2 kids with my daughter, and she was taking ballet, so I stopped over at Bruce Wesley Shoe Corral and bought my ballet shoes for her, and she made it work so much so that she became an actress. And a dancer.
Not only are we supporting local small business, family-owned business, but the prices are exactly the same as if I had to go all the way downtown. And I don't want to have to go all the way downtown, leave my neighborhood just to buy a pair of shoes.
These are high-quality shoes. This is not the little Walker. These are shoes from all over the world, very high quality, very high standards here.
Especially during this time, I mean, Black people are always having like adversities and things, and just being able to lift up a store, it's just very important to give back to your community and still build your community up at the same time. So Wesley's is like the perfect store to do that.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
And customers say it's the professionalism and attention to detail that's kept them coming back for decades. Despite being in a pandemic, Wesley employees say they are still safely offering their sit and fit service, something you don't get everywhere anymore. And that is our show for this Tuesday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you right here tomorrow.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud of their attorneys selected for the 2020 Illinois Super Lawyers List.